What are your biggest institutional barriers to driving energy efficiency internally in your data centers and your systems? A lot of this seems like no-brainers, but what's getting in the way of taking it to the next level?
Most energy efficiency work, I would say, actually is a no-brainer. But people don't seem to have brains. So,
even at
not
Google?
really. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. I apologize. So people talk about energy efficiency being the low-hanging fruit, not just in data centers, yet they don't do the work. They don't do the energy efficiency upgrades. Many energy efficiency opportunities are left sitting there. In many organizations, it's because the people who, for example, and you talk about data centers, the people who buy the computers, the people who design and build the building, and the people who actually pay to run the computers, to pay for the electricity, might all be different people. And they each have their own budget. And they're each trying to optimize their own budget. So the guy who's buying the computer, or gal, wants to get the most computer for the buck possible, which means spend as little money on, say, a more efficient power supply or more efficient components as possible. So you buy the cheapest thing you can. It might cost more to run. That's somebody else's problem. And that kind of issue you find not just in data centers, but throughout businesses, throughout, you look at somebody who's renting an apartment, might have an inefficient refrigerator. Well, who bought the refrigerator? The landlord. It was cheaper, less efficient. So there are institutional barriers. In companies, if you focus people on total cost of ownership, lifetime cost, capital plus operating cost, and get everybody to think in those terms, not just in terms of their own budget, you can make a lot of progress. And that's, we started as a company 13 years ago, almost. At the beginning, we didn't have budgets. Everyone was just thinking in terms of total cost. We've maintained that culture throughout, even as we become a much bigger company with budgets and so on. So if someone has a capital budget and they realize they could spend more money and need a bigger budget but save the company money, they'll ask for permission to increase their budget, or they'll say, I want to do this, here's why. Permission will be granted. Many companies, you wouldn't even ask.
So I just want to, because I think you asked, Christina, you asked a really interesting question. I think it's more and more when I go and I talk both with customers and internally, the challenge is as much, if not more, governance and behavior than it is technology. So an example, when we first started in the data center business, one of my early jobs at Microsoft was running a bunch of the MSN properties. Right? We paid for servers and space allocation. Fast forward over the last 4 or 5 years, we changed the model and we said, actually, we're going to bill you based on energy as the base. And there's additives on top of it, but it's all based on your energy-based consumption. It had massive impact and behavior change because all of a sudden, for the people who weren't already there, and there were many who were, but the people who weren't there, they totally flipped their paradigm. And so what ended up coming out of that is really radical advances around how we actually designed and run data centers, all the way to the fact that some maintenance guy who was now thinking about cost in a different way said, hey, we have all these white roofs. I think we should go clean them and see what happens. And literally, because we watch all this stuff real time, he went out there and power washed off our roofs, because they're white roofs, and the energy consumption in that building immediately dropped by 3%, holding everything else constant. Right? Because his incentive was aligned. I don't think that the guy looking at facilities would have historically gone and said, hey, I think I'm going to go clean the roof.